Okay, so today would normally be our annual financial overview, which I kind of talked about, and I really was hoping to share with you the new financial aspect of the charter school accountability framework. Unfortunately, it's still in progress. We're getting close. I'm hoping to be able to share that with you in October as part of our financial overview for the year. So instead of that, we get risk management, which I don't know about you, but I'd like to say I'm really excited about it, but it's good information. Let's just put it that way. It's stuff we all need to do, and it's good information to have. So we'll go ahead and jump in to that. And it's been a while, so I hope I still remember how to use Zoom. Okay. All right, you guys should be able to see that. Looks good for me. And this has animation, so I'm going to share that with you as well. All right, so mastering risk management. Like I said, this is what we're talking about, and I'm going to be excited whether it is or not an exciting topic. Okay. So why does a risk management matter? This may be something you're all thinking about. So before we jump into that, let's talk about actually what risk management is and just kind of give it a definition for purposes today. Just need to let someone in real quick. There we go. Okay. So risk management, basically, like I said, for our purposes today, we're defining it as the process of identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks, followed by coordinated efforts to minimize, monitor, and control the probability and impact of unfortunate events. So as we go through today, we're going to hear about the significance of risk management in charter schools, the potential risks faced by charter schools, and the impact of effective risk management on charter schools. So, and as we go through this, I know, and you guys may be thinking this, that risk management involves so much more. It's like the overall aspects of a charter school. It's not just financial. So why do we need to know this? And what I'm going to say, the reason I'm presenting it here to you is because any risk that the school faces has the potential to have financial consequences on the school. So it's as important for you to keep these factors in mind so that you can plan for any financial issues you need to deal with for these risk factors. So, so basically risk management has a direct effect on what you do as a business manager too. All right. Okay. All right. So the key components of risk management, there are four. It starts with risk identification. And once you have identified those risks, then you move into risk assessment. And from there, you move into risk mitigation and then to monitoring and review. So let's talk about some common risks in charter schools. Although these are common risks that would be true of all of you, you need to keep in mind also you all have different programs, different aspects to your school. Some of you have farm, some of you may have sports programs. So even though these are common ones, as you think through risk, you need to keep in mind that there are risks that are unique to each of your schools as well. So right now, we are just going to talk about the ones that are common to your schools. Well, let's start with the financial risks that you may face as a charter school. You're pretty much dependent on public funding for all of your finances, and there may be some some outside donors that also provide you with money, but generally your operating expenses and all of that would generally be paid out of your government funding, while when you get those donations and things, those would be kind of your extra special things that you do on top of your regular curriculum and those kind of things. So your operating expenses, is always a good idea to use your government funding for as much as that as possible, so that if for some reason your outside funding dries up, you still have those funds to meet the needs of your main programming. So there's those financial fluctuations that can come with dependence on government funding too, because we know sometimes the program is funded and then maybe next year it'll go away. Sometimes they roll it up into something else, but you just never know. And you never know if the WPU is going to keep up with inflation and what your teachers are expecting for increases. So you need to think about those things. Also, budget deficits, if you've maybe forgotten to plan for something for the year that was expected, or you had an unexpected expense that was quite large come up. This could cause you to fall into a budget deficit, and that could impact the school's ability of delivering its programs and services. So those are things we need to be aware of. Are we capturing all of those? But there's a risk that maybe we didn't. So maybe we need to plan for something just in case. There are also cash flow challenges. There could be irregular cash flows that come into your school. And also, I know a lot of your federal grants and some of your state grants may be based upon a reimbursable kind of program. So you have to expend those funds before you can get them back. And the timing, there may be some unsure, you're not quite sure exactly when those funds are going to come in. So you have to make sure that while you're waiting for those reimbursements, you're able to still continue to fund those ongoing things. So that's one thing that you need to plan for and to have in mind as a risk, is that those cash flow challenges that you could experience. The next one are compliance risks. As a charter school, you have to comply with many federal and state laws and regulations that govern education. And you need to make sure that you understand what those laws are as a school, so that you can make sure you're complying with those and that you don't fall out of compliance and have some consequences that go with that. You also, as you know, have many reporting requirements, and failure to meet those requirements could result in penalties or even loss of funding for a bit. So you want to make sure that you understand those reporting requirements and make sure you're on top of them. The next one is operational challenges. There could be a high staff turnover at your school for some reason. And if that happens, that can disrupt the continuity in teaching and in the administrative roles, which could in fact affect student learning and organizational stability, which could just lead to other things on a spiral downward. Technology failures, we all know about that from what happened with the Microsoft update this summer. So when you're relying on your technology, as a lot of you are, for instructional delivery, administrative tasks, and communication, you're exposed to the risks of system failures, cyber threats, and data breaches that could come up. And then facilities management. Most of you have a building, and if you have an aging building, there are maintenance issues obviously that can come up with that. There could be safety concerns that could pose operational risks, and they may impact the health and safety of your students and your staff as well. And then finally, reputational risks. Negative publicity, whether it's warranted or not, happens. And incidents such as scandals, controversies, or adverse media coverage can damage a school's reputation, which could erode your public trust as well. There could be stakeholder dissatisfaction from parents, students, staff, community members. And if they're voicing those concerns publicly, it could lead to a reputational damage, which could lead to enrollment declines in your school. And then finally, brand perception. Perceptions of academic quality, safety, diversity, and inclusion. They all influence the school's brand, image, and competitive position within the educational market. So addressing these potential risks requires proactive risk management strategies on the part of the school. So we talked about the 4 key components of risk management. So let's start with the first one, which is some risk identification, and we'll talk about some techniques to help your school identify the risks that are there. So you could have brainstorming sessions. This one's pretty easy. Gather up the staff and the stakeholders, talk to them, see what they're thinking, see what they've identified and seen, things that keep them up at night. What they see could be a potential risk to your school. Then review historical data and trend analysis. Is there something that's coming up and is ongoing that you have found that causes problems within your school that's just not being managed very well? Look at those things and try and come up with ways so that you can identify it as a risk, so you can try and come up with ways later of how you can deal with it when you move into that risk mitigation component of the risk management plan. And then you can conduct things called risk assessments and surveys. Risk assessment could be something where you just start out in this, like right now, we're just identifying the risks. So you start out by just listing the risks that you're seeing, maybe through that brainstorming session. And you're kind of using that as a place to start from as you start looking at as you're assessing your risks, and then as you have your mitigation plan come up, you can use this risk assessment as a starting place to list what the risks are, so you can move into those other areas. And then surveys are another thing that you could do. You could send out surveys to your stakeholders, staff, if you want, parents, whoever you want, just determining what are you looking at, what are you concerned about. Like, something that you may want to ask if you're doing it internally is the school reviewing its financial statements? How would you rate the school's financial stability? Does the school have a disaster recovery plan? Are emergency drills done? Are staff members regularly trained on compliance issues? These are things that you could put in a survey. Just look through those areas that you might see, and it could come out of the brainstorming session, and just share them with your stakeholders in the form of questions, asking, hey, is this working? What do you think's going on here? Are we doing this adequately? Just come up with something that works for you if you plan to go that way. Other things you can use are risk registers and matrices, and we're going to look at a couple of an example of each of these. So we'll start with the risk register. This just helps you to start identifying those risks, and then kind of leaving an opportunity for you to move in where you're assessing the risk as well. So for right now, for risk identification purposes, you would just start by listing what those risks are. In this example, we have a data breach, project delay, budget overruns, things like that. This is just an example that I pulled off of AI, honestly, from ChatGPT. Or no, not ChatGPT. We can't use that. We use Copilot. That's it. So as I was looking through this, I wanted to show you, just give you an example of what it would look like. So again, you start by showing what those risks are, and then it shows a description of what it is, the impact, the likelihood of it happening. You have room there to put your mitigation plan when it's ready. You have an owner, which is very important, and a status. So each risk, as you move on down through the components, is going to be assessed for its potential impact and likelihood, and then a plan created to mitigate it, and the owner is responsible for managing the risks, and the status just indicates where the risk at in the process of putting it in place. This would be your risk matrix. It's similar. It's a little bit more complex in that you're kind of using the twofold. You're looking at impact and likelihood together to come up with where you would determine that you would be in the matrix. For instance, this tool is used to assess the severity of risk, right? By considering their impact and likelihood. I'm so sorry. So in this matrix, you're looking at impact, And that refers to the potential consequences of a risk if it occurs. And you can categorize it as low, medium, or high. Then you look at likelihood, which is across the top. So impact is going down. Likelihood's across the top, and it refers to the probability of a risk occurring, and also categorized as low, medium, or high. And then once you put them into that categories, that's where you look in the middle. So for example, a risk with high impact and high likelihood, which would be here. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but I'm showing it. You would see that it's critical, while a risk with low impact and low likelihood would be classified as low. Now, this is just an example. So I'm going to say if you want to use a risk matrix, I would kind of do some research and maybe look at it and see if where these things are falling. Are they valid places to fall? Like if it's medium impact and high likelihood, should we really classify it as high? I would say yes, I'm sure it would. But you just want to kind of, don't just go by something and use it. Try and figure out if that's why it's like that. Why is it considered low? So I would suggest just doing some research if you want to use a risk matrix, just to see why these things are classified as they are, and make sure that you agree with them and that's what you would want for your school if you decided to use them. Okay. All right. Now we'll talk about risk assessment and prioritization. And to do this, you could continue to use something like a matrix. You could also assign scores based on severity, excuse me. So if you were planning on doing like risk scoring, it could look something like this. And it looks really similar, I know, to the last one, but it's just putting things into category. And as you can see, impact and likelihood are kind of the two things that we're looking at. So in a scoring situation like this, we would rate the potential consequences, which is your impact of the risk, on a score of 1 to 5, where 1 is low impact and 1 is 5 on this particular scoring card that we're looking at here. And then you would do the same with likelihood. You would rate the probability of the risk occurring on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is low likelihood and 5 is high likelihood. And then for this scorecard, what we're doing is we're multiplying the two together to get our risk score. And then if you were to do something like this, you could come up with a risk score of between 1 and 25 in this situation. So you would need to determine where you think it's reasonable to cut something off for low. So in here, we see that a 4 is still low, whereas when it got to a 6, we're at medium. For this organization who uses something like this, they may have scored 5 at a medium. And then as we see, 16 is where we see the first one that's high, but they could be doing 9s as a high, or maybe a 12 as a high is where their cutoff is. So if you determine that you want to use a risk scoring, you just need to determine where your cutoffs are going to be, how it's going to work for you, make it your own. And again, like I said, do some research if you're thinking about this, maybe that you want to use somebody else's like this, where they've decided to multiply it together. Why is that a reasonable way of doing it? Do you like it that way? Do you just want to add them together? What do you want to do? When you're determining that, make it just not arbitrary, but so that it's reasonable for your situation, for your school. And a system like this can help you to systematically assess and prioritize your risks. And it helps you ensure that your most severe risks are addressed first by ranking them as high, medium, low. Okay. Oh, let's go back to the other one for a second. And then we want to consider both qualitative and quantitative factors as well. So if we come back over here, this is just some examples of things that you might think of as quantitative and qualitative. So when you're conducting your risk assessment, it's important that you consider both the qualitative and the quantitative factors so you can get a comprehensive understanding of the risks. Some things that can be considered qualitative factors are expert opinions. Gather insights from your experienced staff and your stakeholders by interviewing them or including them in your brainstorming sessions. And this will help you to identify potential risks that may not be immediately obvious to you. Again, historical data can be so helpful just to see what's gone on in the past, and is there something that we're seeing happening on a continuous basis that we should maybe look at and get taken care of and see if we can reduce the number of incidences or just eliminate it altogether. And then scenario an analysis, you could think through different scenarios and what their potential impacts could be. And this can help you understand broader context of the risks that you're looking at. For quantitative, you can look at statistical data using numerical data to assess the likelihood of an impact of the risks. You can use your financial metrics to help you evaluate what your potential financial impacts of your risks are. And then there are performance indicators that you may have for your school that you can continue to use. They can tell you a lot about what's going on and things that you might need to get ahead of or look at in more detail. Risk mitigation strategies. So I kind of have your general stuff that you can do, and then kind of at the bottom it talks about risk management strategies, which all of this is, but it's kind of applying risk management to a situation itself, whereas the other ones are just kind of overall global things you can do, if that makes sense. So internal controls and policies. You should all have internal controls. I'm sure you all know that. And policies are so important because I remember at my old job, I kind of had this little saying is we never knew we needed a policy until we needed a policy, right? Because something happened. So as you're thinking through these risk strategies, the hope is that you can get ahead of it. You can, instead of reacting afterwards with a policy, as you think through these things, you can get the policy in place before it happens. Like I'll give you an example of something that I was aware of that happened in a school. They were having an event and the students were decorating for the event, and one of them was on a ladder trying to get some decorations up. He fell off the ladder. He suffered a traumatic brain injury. He recovered quite well. He did not fully recover. He will never be the same as he was, but he was able to resume all his activities, even his sports activities. But it was traumatic and it was horrible. So of course the family felt they needed compensation, which I'm sure I understand fully and completely. But they wanted a lot and their son would never be the same. So I understand that. And so they ended up settling it for an undisclosed amount. But it had quite the effect on the school, just on its reputation, on the school's finances. It was just, it was not good. And of course on the student and his family, which I said, he'll never be the same. So this is one where I'm sure the school has a policy now where students don't get on ladders, right? So try and you want to get ahead of something like that and think through, oh, do we want students on ladders beforehand instead of after you find out that you need the policy to say no? All right, then you can develop contingency plans for critical operations. Just things that you know that might happen. I know for a lot of schools, older buildings, when I was on a school board, the HVA system was always coming up. We were always putting money into that HVAC system. So just think through those things. What looks like it might come up and be a problem that we're going to have to take care of, and try and develop a contingency plan so that when it does come up, you'll be ready to take care of it. And then super important is training staff on risk awareness and response protocols. If we go back to that example of the ladder, the student on the ladder, if the person who's the staff member who's in charge of helping with the decorating isn't aware that there's a policy saying, hey, we don't have students on ladders, then they may not know, and they may let a student go up the ladder and something could happen. So we want to make sure that our staff is always aware of what kind of risks what our policies are, what's going on with the school to help keep everybody safe and healthy, and just make sure that they know what they need to do if something does come up as well. And then, like I said, there's the risk management strategies that we're kind of talking about, where we could apply on something like a case by case basis if we needed to, or we can apply them globally as well. But just to kind of think it through, I just want to use an example of, let's say you decide as a school that you really want to take your students on an international trip to learn whatever it's the history, the section of history that you're learning about in school for that year. You want to make it real for them, so you want to take them on this international trip, which would be amazing and great. And then as you're thinking it through and you're going through the risks that are associated with that, and you're looking at them, you have many choices on how you can handle that risk. The first risk is avoidance, where you can say, hey, the risks involved with this trip are just so many, and we just don't have the capacity to manage that. So we're just going to avoid those risks altogether, and we're not going to do it. We're not going to take the trip. We're just going to stay in school. We'll just learn at our desks like we normally do. That's okay. That'll work. Another thing you can do is you can do risk reduction. And what this strategy aims at is reducing the likelihood of impact of the risk. So for our purposes, if we're looking at risk reduction and we decide, okay, how a risk is that we could lose students, like we could be going on a tour and nobody's paying attention and somehow we lose a student. So you want to put policies and procedures in place on how you're going to handle that situation for while you're on the trip. Who's going to be responsible for making sure all the students are keeping up with the group, staying with the group, and showing up where they need to be. So there have to be procedures and policies in place for you to manage that risk if you're going to work on the reduction side of it. You can also transfer risk, which involves shifting the risk to a third party, such as an insurance organization, such as insurance, or you could outsource it as well. So I just need to drink real fast. So in the case of what we're talking about here, we want to transfer risk. So let's say one of the risks is that a student or a staff member could become sick or get injured on this trip. So we have to have something in place to make sure that we're able to take care of that. So maybe you decide you want to get some insurance to cover that if there is an injury or an illness. I know my son took a trip to Haiti, and we made sure that he had some insurance in place for if he had any medical issues while he was there, so that it wasn't something that we would have to worry about if it came up later. Another thing that you can do is acceptance. Sometimes the best strategy is to accept the risk and prepare to deal with the consequences. Now, in the case of our international trip, I would not recommend acceptance, but there could be some minor risks that could come up that you could say, okay, we can accept that. But for overall, I would not recommend acceptance on this one. It's like you want to have those things in place to mitigate those risks while you're gone. Another one is sharing. This involves distributing the risks among multiple parties. So something you could do here is there are organizations who actually arrange trips for schools for their students to go out of the country and experience some history and those things. So you could work with an organization like that. They've already thought through all those risks. They've already thought through the insurance and through getting the students there and keeping them safe and what all that would entail. So maybe you just want to say, hey, we're going to partner with this organization and we're going to let them help us. I always say help because your school is responsible for your children. So you need to make sure that if you outsource it to somebody else, you need to make sure that that person who's responsible is holding up to their responsibility. So never just put it in their hands and wash your hands of it. That's kind of a little bit less than, it's not as bad as acceptance, but it's pretty close. So just make sure you're on top of making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do if you plan on going that way. Contingency planning, develop a plan to deal with the risks as they occur. And that could be part of all of this. It's like, if a student is injured while you're on this trip, it's like, yes, you have the insurance in place, but what do we need to do to go get him the help he or she needs, and to make sure that the insurance is doing what they're supposed to do to make sure it gets paid and all of that. So you want to kind of have that plan developed before your trip in this case. And it's gonna that plan is hopefully gonna include identifying triggers and indicators that the risk is becoming a reality and not just a risk anymore, but it's actually happening. And then you know what steps to take in response to that risk becoming a reality. And next we move on to our monitoring and our review process. Here is where we're going to establish regular interval. Well, so we've got pretty much everything in place and it's hopefully working, but we want to make sure. So that's what this part is. So we're going to establish regular review intervals for looking at the risk assessments and going through them and seeing if we've properly addressed it, if what we're doing is working, or if maybe we need to change it up or something. We also want to see if it is working, leave it alone. If there's something that we're doing that we don't really need to do because the other processes are working, maybe do that if you can. And you also you want to make sure that the people who are responsible for whatever risk it is and making sure that the risk is being mitigated, you want to make sure that they're doing what they need to do. See if maybe they need help, or maybe there's somebody else that you want to reassign it to who might be able to have more capacity to do it than whoever it was assigned to originally. You want to monitor your key risk indicators for early warning signs when you're in this stage too. And then also, if you find that you have had something that's come up, you want to make sure that you're conducting post-incident reviews, because you want to be able to learn from those past experiences and make sure and look and see if there's something else that maybe you could have done that would have handled it better, and maybe whatever the incident was, we could have staved it off and made sure it didn't happen, or that maybe the consequences weren't as significant as they ended up being. Just look at, do those reviews and see what you could have done better or differently. And then communicate your risk management updates again to your stakeholders. If you're making changes in policies and procedures, they need to know what those changes are so that they can help you to put them in place. Also, you want to make sure, especially if you've changed the responsible person, make sure you're communicating that to your people so they know who to go to if something comes up that they're going to need help with. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about actually implementing a risk management program. We've talked about the key components, we've talked about the different risks that you may come across, and we talked about tools that you can use. So let's actually talk through just really what the process is of how we get this going and making it a reality. So the first thing you want to do is you want to establish, as a school, a risk management team. So you want this team to be composed of dedicated individuals comprised of school administrators, staff members, and any other relevant stakeholders. And you want to make sure you're assigning, sorry, somebody's just joining us. You also want to make sure that you're assigning the responsibilities to the team members, and that you're trying to ensure that you have representation from all the different departments and areas of expertise. It's like if you have something that you've identified as a risk and there's somebody that you know that knows this subject well, bring them in, get their expertise, get their thoughts on that. You don't have to build everything from the ground up when you have somebody who already has familiarity with it. So always make sure that you're trying to get as much input from as many different perspectives and people as you can. Then you want to conduct your risk assessment. So this is where it starts with the identification, then assessing, putting them into those tools that we had talked about. So you want to make sure that you're including in when you're identifying risks, like your financial risk, your operations risk, compliance risks, reputation risks. And let's say, so we have those 4 categories, but let's say you think safety is a big idea. Well, safety, in my mind, generally falls under your operations. But if you feel like you want to pull it out, definitely pull it out. Look at safety more carefully. I know with the new regulations that came out, the laws and rules, safety is a big deal. So if you need to pull it out and make it a separate risk category to look at, definitely do that. If there's something else that you can think of that you just want to pull out because it's such a big deal, do that. You want to identify as many risks as you can so that you know what you need to work on. And then you want to use those different techniques that we talked about to get those risks identified within those categories. So you have your brainstorming sessions, you're looking at historical data analysis, maybe you're doing surveys, you're doing listing your risks on a risk assessment sheet to get you started. Whatever it means, whatever tool you decide to do, just get that in place and start working from there. And then once you've identified those risks and you've done that risk assessment where you've determined, hey, what's the likelihood? What's the impact? How is this going to affect us? What kind of scoring are we using? How are we identifying which ones are high risk and which ones are low risk? Use those tools. Have something to help you prioritize those risks so that you make sure that you are dealing with the most important risks first. It's like there may be other risks that you see that are important as well, but we want to make sure that those high impact risks are the first ones that we deal with. And then you're going to develop your risk management, risk management strategies. So these strategies, again, we just talked about those. You're going to use those to control each prioritized risk. You want to consider a range of risk management techniques. Like I said, you could use risk avoidance, you could use risk reduction, transfer, acceptance, all of those different strategies that we talked about in addition to your policies, procedures, and internal controls, those kind of things. And again, this is a good place to involve your stakeholders in the development as you start to work through developing those risk mitigation plans, because you want to ensure that you have a buy-in and you want to make sure that whatever you do is also in alignment with your organizational goals. And then that's again where you move into that risk mitigation. And here, this is where you're going to implement and identify the risk management strategies across your charter school. You want to establish clear policies and procedures and protocols, and then again, provide that training to your staff members so that they know what they're supposed to do. Then you're going to monitor and review. So you want to make sure, as we talked about earlier, that you have established processes for going into that monitoring and reviewing of your risk management measures, and then regularly assessing the effectiveness of the implemented risk management strategies. And you want to make sure you're adjusting whatever's needed. And then communicate and report. Make sure you communicate your risk management objectives, strategies, and updates to all of your relevant stakeholders. This is your administrators, your staff, board members. It could even include your parents and your community members. And then provide regular reports on risk management activities, including risk assessments, mitigation efforts and outcomes so that people understand how things are working and how it's going. And then foster transparency and accountability in your risk management processes. You want to do this to build trust and confidence among your stakeholders. And then always, as I'm sure you know, as you do in anything that you do, you want to continuously improve. So you want to foster a culture of continuous improvement in risk management practices, and then solicit feedback from your stakeholders and incorporate the lessons that you've learned from your past experiences into your future risk management efforts. And then stay informed about emerging risk and industry best practices, and adapt and evolve the risk management plan accordingly. So that is your risk management in a nutshell. And I know in my past job, I used to go to conferences and stuff, and I'd hear great speakers. I don't know that you guys did, but I would. Anyway, and we would hear all this great stuff, and we would just like be, oh yeah, what a great idea. And then we'd go back home and go to work the next day, and we like be so overwhelmed that we would do nothing. And like I said, you guys are the finance managers. You're not over the whole school. It's like you may be thinking, this is not my responsibility. I'm not in charge of risk management. That's for the other leadership to do. And what I would say to that is if you're feeling that way, like there's nothing you can do, or just like, where do I go from here? I would say, you can share ideas obviously with your leadership, but also there's a step you can take today within your financial area where you can look at the risks that may be there that you haven't. I mean, I'm sure you're on top of things like making sure that your budget's okay and planning for contingencies that you know of, but maybe you want to think out, oh, what if something really horrible were to happen? Do we actually have the insurance that we need to cover that? I mean, think through those financial risks and share that with your leadership, and that may kind of start a movement. So where they go into this, and maybe your school already has a risk management team and is awesome at doing this. And if that's the case, God bless. I hope that's working. I'm glad, and I hope it's working well. So, yeah, just do one thing today. I guess that's where I'm trying to go with this. Try and do one thing today that you can do to change something if you see it needs changed, and just put a bug in somebody's ear, or just start looking at what you can do on your level today. So that is what I have for you. As I said, again, we're going to be talking again in October, and I'm hoping, like I said, again, that is going to be on our new financial aspects of the charter school accountability framework. There is October 1st, the fall finance training. That's always good stuff. I always learn a lot from that. So if you can make it, I really recommend that you do. They do record it just like I do, so you'll have an opportunity to see it later if you can't make it. But that's why it's on October 1st, which is really close to our September meeting, so we've canceled that. And then I have some ideas for what to do this year. We have 7 meetings that we do. So we have this one, and then October we're hoping for the annual financial overview starring the financial framework. But anyway, I can come up with stuff like this for you to go for those 5 more. But I like it when you guys tell me what you want. So if you want to put something in the chat that you would love to hear on the topic, that would be great. If you are thinking of it, I'm sure somebody else is thinking of it as well. If you don't want your name attached to it, but you still want to tell me, just email me, please, because I would rather you hear about something that you find helpful than kind of just these are good things too. I think risk management is a good thing to teach on as well. And we can do these kind of things, but I also want to make sure that you're getting what you need. So if you could help me discover what you need, that would be great. And I thank you for coming and thank you for being here through the whole thing. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and on into the weekend, and we will see you in October. Thanks so much for coming, guys. Bye.